see what God sees in your life. You begin to reinterpret the things that you normally would see every single day. You begin to see hope in hopelessness. You see beauty in ashes. You reinterpret the gifts and the talents that God has given you. You reinterpret your past, your present, and even your future. Everything begins to look different. Those stars in the night sky would always, from that moment on, take on a different meaning for Abraham, because he was able to connect with what God saw for his life. And some of you are sitting here and you've never asked the question, God, what are your dreams for me? And I'm asking you today, will you connect with what God sees for your life? This is why I feel like Job even says, with all that he had heard about God, with everything Job had heard about God, he finally had to come to a point where he said, God, my ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. My eyes have seen you. He's a God who dreams for you. I'm gonna move on, and I'm just gonna go right into the next point. He's a God who's committed to you. There's a funny story, and I'm not going to say the name of the person or where they're from. I kind of got permission to share this story. But I remember, I don't know if you know what it's like sometimes to just question God's presence and promise in your life. And it was a time in my life, I'm telling you, where everything was going wrong. Financially, I couldn't make ends meet. I wasn't doing well in college at the time when I was in school. I mean, in every single way, you know, in my family or emotionally or spiritually, I mean, it seems like it's a disaster. And I still didn't give up. I was still believing that God was with me until one day, there was a certain particular person that, I'm not a very athletic person, but I could kill this guy in basketball. I'm telling you, you're Indian when you're able to play without shoes. I would play on the driveway without shoes and still beat this guy. I think he's here. I'm sorry for saying this. But I would destroy this guy every time we played basketball. And you want to pick yourself up, go to the guy that you can normally beat and play a game of basketball and you'll feel better about yourself, And I remember one day I went to his house and we were going to play basketball, and I don't know, I may have had no shoes on, who knows, I may have been that arrogant. And this kid beat me. This guy beat me. Nothing I was shooting was falling in, and you know what, it may sound silly to you. The first time he ever beat me, it may sound really ridiculous to you, but I was convinced that God had left me. I was convinced that I lost the favor of God because financially I was suffering, emotionally, physically, whatever you want to say, in school, academically, I was failing almost in every aspect of my life. And when I lost in basketball, it was the most depressing car ride home back home. I'm telling you. And I don't know if that's what you feel like sometimes. It sounds silly. But sometimes when life is just coming at you full force, you feel like that. You may be out there thinking, man, Jason, I've heard the things that God may be dreaming for me, but it doesn't sound like it makes sense now. You don't know what's going on in my family. God can't be with me. You don't know what's going on right now in my marriage, or you don't know what's going on in school. I see God providing for everyone else's tuition but mine. I see God opening doors for everyone else but mine. I see God healing other people in other families, but people in my own family continue to go sick. How can you say that God still has dreams for me? This is one thing I realized with Abraham. And if you can see how committed God is to you. He would go outside and he'd look at the stars, right? And those stars represented the promise of God. And if you are like me, what you ended up doing is you ended up looking at the stars at night, and you were so fixated on the blessings and the promises of God and the dreams that God had, that sooner or later when crisis came and tragedy came and calamity came, every symbol of the promise, every sign of the promise disappeared. You walk outside and you know what? You look at the stars, but sooner or later the sun rises, the cloud comes, and every single symbol and sign of the promise disappears. What will you gaze upon then? Abraham would look outside. He could be enamored by the beautiful night sky, but eventually the sun would rise, the clouds would come. But what would Abraham gaze upon then? You may have had prophets speak into your life. You may have servants of God pray for you and tell you how you successful you will be in your life, and you're so fixated on the dreams, on the stars, that you fail to recognize the vastness and the infinitude of the one who holds those stars in the sky.
Man.
And that's what we're like. We come to church and we think only about our pursuits and our agendas and our ambition, and we completely fail to recognize the vastness, infinitude, the magnificence, the beauty, the wonder of the God who saw you before anyone else did, who saw you, your lifeless substance, before you were even on this earth, and had dreams for you. And you think so much about your pursuits and not the wonder of who holds them. And you may be thinking about the things you want to accomplish, but I guarantee you, the sun will rise and those stars will disappear. What will you look on then? I hope it is the unchanging, unfailing character of God. And so Abraham asked this question, and I'm going to close here. He says, God, how will I know you are committed to me in this, God? How will I know that you won't give me over? Right? How will I know that I will possess this? And God did something really strange to us, but to Abraham, it would be so profound. This would speak volumes. If you're like me, whenever you read about animals in the Bible, you kind of just skim over it. Okay, some animal, some cow sacrifice, put on the altar, whatever. Okay, let's go. Right? This is what God says. Abraham says, how will I know? And God says, I want you to do this. I want you to take these animals, and I want you to cut them in half. And I want you to lay them over. And then he put Abraham to sleep. And before you know it, the last verse we read, a smoking fire pot, which is a fire and smoke is a representation of God's presence, goes through this path of animals. That's how I'll know God? What does that even mean? Well, back then, whenever there was a covenant made, oftentimes it was between a master and it was a servant, a lord and a vassal. When there was a covenant or a commitment made to seal this promise, what would often happen is they would take these animals and they would cut them in half. And it was almost like laying a path for it. It was a very bloody ordeal, a very gruesome ordeal. And the servant, oftentimes, the one who is lesser, would walk between these animals. So bloody, and what he essentially was saying is this: when he took that dreadful path, he was essentially saying, let me be like these animals if I don't do what I said I will do. And what we have here is incredible. Abraham asks the question, God, how will I know that you'll do this? And God speaks to him in this way. He says, cut these animals, and he puts Abraham to sleep. The lesser, the servant, goes to sleep, and the master, the Lord, goes through these animals and says, essentially, Abraham, let me be like these animals if I don't do what I'm saying to you.
Amen.
From beginning to end, it's God. It is a man who is totally and utterly incapable of fulfilling the dreams that God has for him. And God says, you want to know how I'll do this, Abraham? This is how serious I am about the dreams I have for your life. Let me be like these animals if I don't do this for you. Some of you, if you're like me, man, when you read the Bible, it's like, that's Jason, those are superheroes of the Bible. That's Abraham, that's David, right? That's Paul. These are the saints that we read about in the Bible, right? I'm not like them. Of course, God is going to have dreams for them. They're in our history book here. You wonder, how does that apply to me? If you believe your faith at all, when you and I, the lesser, the servant, couldn't hold our end of the deal, when we were marred by sin and there was a chasm that separated us and God, and no one could fill that gap but God, when we were to take that dreadful walk, Jesus Christ took that dreadful walk, and he essentially said this: you know how committed I am to see my glory manifested in your life. My child, let me be like this.
Amen.
That's how committed I am to the dreams I have for your life. But maybe you're sitting there and it never has come across your mind for even a moment. God, what are your dreams for me? What do you dream about when you look at me? When you see me like a child, where does your imagination take you? Some of you may be saying, well, I'm in ministry, I'm in church, that doesn't apply to me. And you think the dreams that God has for you is to pastor a mega church? But what if God has different dreams? Others of you may be saying, no, I'll just stay in this